Good evening and welcome to Plain Talk. My guest today is no stranger to Plain Talk and indeed to confronting controversial issues in Guyana. On the last occasion in January of this year, he gave a failing grade to the APNU for its failure to address constitutional changes which it had committed itself to leading up to the 2011 elections. His sharp criticism drew responses, of course. And so, on Plain Talk this evening, we'll be revisiting some of those issues and asking him about some of the more of his perspectives on some of the more recent developments. I'm speaking, of course, about Dr. David Hinds, executive member of the Working People's Alliance. Dr. Hinds, welcome again to Plain Talk.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks again for having me.
Now, you've been here just about 2 weeks ago, I think.
Well, 3 weeks, three weeks or so, yeah.
Give me your assessment of the state of politics in Guyana.
Well, I've been paying a lot of attention to what people have been saying. I try to move around a lot, mostly in Georgetown, sometimes on the East Coast, in Boston, of course, where I'm from. I spend a lot of time there. And if I listen to what people are saying and try to get from that some sense of where things are, people continue to be, of course, frustrated with the fact that there has been no movement in terms of the material circumstances since the elections. And more people are speaking up, not only against the government, but also speaking up against the opposition, which they feel is not very clear about how it wants to deal with this government. From my own perspective as an observer, as
an activist,
as a political commentator, I myself am somewhat unclear about what kind of grand perspective the opposition has in terms of...
Well, when you say opposition, you mean the APNU and the AFC?
And the AFC. You know, there is a certain liberty I take with my analysis of the APNU because I'm part of it by virtue of WPA membership, and I'm less so with the AFC. But in this instance, I'm including both of them because
as a commentator, you have every right to do so.
Right. And so from my standpoint, I think what has become clearer and clearer is that there is no clear strategy, no clear vision. I think Henry Jeffrey said that about the APNU. No clear vision about how is it they are going to deal, or they want to deal with what they call this new dispensation, which I will call a unique dispensation. And unique, something that is unique, really deserves an approach that is unique. And it is that unique approach that I am not really seeing, although one has to give the benefit of the doubt to those who are in the hot seat every day. But I'm still not convinced that there is a coordinated, clear approach as to how one confronts the situation at this particular historical juncture.
Well, you mentioned Dr. Henry Jeffrey. He actually said the APNU doesn't even seem to have a plan to deal with the issues concerning its own constituents.
If you are not in the APNU, that is a fair assessment to make. And I am somewhat in sympathy with the folks in the APNU because they're really dealing with something called partnership politics, which is a new kind of politics. It's a politics that we have never entered into before. You have two major partners.
Well, that's not quite true. The WPA is, in fact, a form of partnership.
Well,
its genesis came out of three.
Yeah, but it's a partnership that eventually became a cohesive political party, right? This is a partnership.
But with very strong personalities and strong sometimes opposing views.
Yes, and coming out of a different era. Now, what should not be lost on us? You're talking about a partnership in which two really opposing parties are in. I mean, that's unique. I mean, the WP and the PNC could not have been further apart. And here are two parties who have come together to form a partnership. And so, therefore, it's a learning process. You're talking about different political cultures, in some cases, different political ideology, different political approaches. And so I recognize that, and I think that that is something that one has to take into consideration as one critiques the APNU. But what is those things that I'm listing as challenges could themselves be strengths? And so I think that after 2 years, almost 2 years, I think
Well,
it is time.
2 years, yes. It is
Yes,
2
I
years
think it
since
is. I think it is time that the partnership begins to articulate what Henry Jeffrey is talking about, a clear vision as to what it wants to do at this particular juncture.
Well, sometimes one gets the impression it doesn't know what it wants to do. I mean, look, several months ago, probably over a year, Dr. Rupert Ryan was on this program. He said, oh, we're working on, we've got our legislative agenda, but of course we want to release it and discuss it among our own people first. We've not heard anything about any legislative agenda. We've heard nothing on constitutional reform, which was supposed to have been the real pivotal driving force behind the APNU.
Well, I guess, Chris, pardon me for taking the big view, but I think all of that is symptomatic of the politics of this country in general, the way governance, what passes for governance in this country, the way politics are done in this country. I think that points to something that is fundamental in our politics. It's a kind of contempt for ordinary people of this country. I think political parties.
So you're suggesting the APNU is in fact, it's, whether wittingly or unwittingly, is a demonstration of contempt
Well,
for its
I
own
want
people?
to put that large. It's not just the APNU, but the AFC and the PPP. And what I'm saying
No, but
is,
your special concern, of course,
yeah,
is
to
about
understand what the criticism you're making of the APNU, which is not, I think, totally inaccurate, that it is not articulated to the Guyanese people in any clear way that this is what we intend to do, that it's part of that larger malaise in the country, that when a country drifts or slides to the point that we are, what it does is that it consumes everyone. Martin Carter said, all are involved or are consumed. And the opposition, the government, they're all consumed by what I call this contempt for people, where you go to people, you ask them for their votes, and you do not go back to them and have a conversation with them, report to them, find out from them about what is it they want you to do. Now, when I walk the streets of this city and this country, I get a parliamentary agenda from the people, right? Yeah. They say very clearly what is it that they want, and I think.
But you saw it. You saw it that afternoon at the hotel when the money laundering legislation was being discussed at the forum.
And I'm very glad you raised that, because the WPA sponsored that symposium. And our sponsorship of that symposium, we hope is part of an ongoing thing, because we have decided that we are going to, I am being critical of the political parties, but I belong to a political party. What are we doing? Well, that was our kind of small effort in that direction to have a conversation with people on these critical issues.
So what message did you take from that? I mean, and not only on anti-money laundering, but what was the wider message you took from that forum?
Well, the wider message is clear. One, there are several messages. Let me just list a couple. One is that people are in tune with what's going on, and people have a lot to say, and people have views on this issue. That's the first thing, that thing became a conversation rather than just a symposium with folks sitting at the top there and talking down to people. That's the first message. The second message that I took from that is that people are clear in their minds That the problem that we confront is not just an uncaring government, an unresponsive government, a government that is steeped in the notion of bad governance, but also an opposition that is aid and abetting the government. I think that
But
came through.
you're stopping short of saying it's steeped in the same kind
Well, I
of
said that before. I said it's part of a larger malaise. And I think what came through very clearly is that people are very, very clear in their minds that this problem is not a problem in which the government alone is going to solve. This problem calls for a concerted effort on the part of all elected representatives, including especially those two political parties, the AFC and the APNU, to try to bring some kind of fundamental change. And that's the third thing I think that came out of that. That people are not talking about tinkering. People are not talking with patching up. I think it's clear in people's minds that what we need is a change in the governance structure, a change in the governance culture, a change in the makeup of government itself.
Any other thing came out of that from your perspective?
Well, there are particular things, I mean, in terms of the money laundering, right? The money laundering issue, I mean, of course, that took up a lot of attention. And I thought that Dr. Thomas's position, which spelled out the larger context in which this money laundering thing has to take place, I think was very instructive. I think what came through from Thomas's presentation was the fact that we have a politics and a political economy that is really driven a lot by what is happening in the informal and the criminalized sectors in this country. And it's interesting that Ram Karan came out on the weekend with that. That I think what Dr. Thomas made very clear there, and it's a position that we are very strong on in the WPA, that when we're talking about the politics of this country, we have to look and see how that politics is really grounded in this whole notion of criminality and corruption and so forth. That's not something you can repair. That's something you've got to remove.
Now, you are a member of the executive of the Working People's Alliance. The WPA meets reasonably regularly. Has it considered, has it met since that symposium and said, look, let us confront the issues, the 3, 4, 5, 6 issues that the people at that symposium raised from the floor?
Yes, we had a very detailed, a very long review of the symposium, the points that were being raised, what are the lessons we learned from them, and what I'm articulating here, or what I've just articulated, is really partly coming out of that assessment that we've done. And so we've concluded that there is need in the society for that kind of interaction, that kind of conversation, and we intend resources, once we get the resources, to continue that kind of engagement. We hope to move that engagement to a couple of areas. We hope to move it to the quarantine, we hope to move it to Linden, and we hope to move it to Buxton within the next month. That we are going to mount similar events in those 3 areas to begin with.
Of course, those are activities.
Yeah.
Towards what objective?
Well, towards the objective is really to get to listen to our people. That's very important.
No, listening,
Yeah.
but yes,
Yeah,
you listen,
yeah, right,
you hear the
right.
message. Then what?
Then, having listened to people, let that inform your approach. Let that inform your emphasis. Let that inform the way in which you engage the government. Let that inform the way in which you build a vision. You build a perspective as to how you move forward. We are, and I know you. Somebody told me you said that I'm quite fond of calling myself a Rodneyite. And part of the Rodneyite praxis Is exactly that. That you go, you ground with the people, you listen to the people, you are taught by the people, you're informed by the people, and then what Guyana said, you take that and you take that and you put it together, and then you give it back to the people in the form of policy and so forth. So we are very clear that that whole thing about grounding with the people of this country is an important and a critical link in formulating policy and political practice in this country. And we intend to go back there. It is not being done, not by the government, not by the opposition.
You mentioned this historical, unique opportunity. What is the window left? Is it closing on making full use, exploiting this opportunity?
Let me answer that question. Yes, it is closing. And it is not closing because the government closed it a long time. The people opened it in November
20th.
2011. And I think insofar as it is closed, it is because the opposition parties, were tasked with not just keeping that opening, but taking that opening and turning it into something else. They are very slow to do that. As I mentioned on another program, what we have done well in the parliament, the opposition has done well, is that they've put up checks on the government, which I think is very important. Checks on the executive is an important part of governance. But as I said, those checks have not led to balance. That is, the checks have not led to any new kind of approach to governance, no discernible shift in the way the government has done. What the government has done is that as they check, the government has tried to, what the boxes do, they hold on to them, right? And they call them in to the office of the president. Look, I think they're going to parliament on Thursday. The president calls them on Wednesday night. Let's talk about how we can get this thing done on Thursday. That kind.
And you're speaking of an actual situation.
Yes, yes.
David Granger was calling
right,
on Wednesday this week to attend on Thursday.
And I think that is untenable.
Should he have gone?
If from my perspective, no. And I'm going to argue that. No, I argued from the beginning that if you are going to meet with the president, that must be leverage. You should not be at the beck and call of the president of this country. And 2 years later, when you have got nothing to show for it, it is time for you to say, I am not coming to speak with you unless you are prepared to deal with certain critical short-term issues and a critical solution to this country.
So you agree with Ramjatan's, the leader of the AFC, his position? He turned on the invitation by the president.
I agree with Ramjatan, but for different reasons.
Sure.
Ramjatan talks about the procurement commission and so on. I think those things are important, that you ought to say, unless you move on these things, I'm not coming to talk. But I'm going further than Ramjatan. I'm saying, unless you are prepared to deal with these short-term critical issues and the long-term political solution, then we're not playing any game. Because I think that long-term political solution is important, Chris. I fear that if we go back to an election under these rules, after this experience, that you give the opposition a majority, they ain't do nothing with it. You give the government the majority, they didn't do anything for it. And if we go back to an election under these same rules, and the losers from 2006 and before, and the losers in 2011 are the same losers, I don't think that we are going to be able to contain what I suspect could happen in such a situation.
When you mentioned Mr. Granger going to the office of the president, he had said some time ago he wasn't going to do that to discuss any single issue. He wanted to discuss an agenda and broad issues. When decisions like these are made, as far as you know, because are you in the periphery of the APNU?
Well, depends on what you mean by the periphery. I mean, I am not part of the executive of the APNU. And it is look, decisions are made right now in the APNU at the level of the shadow cabinet. That's really the powerhouse in the APNU. That is the organ that meets statutorily, and that's where decisions are made, the shadow cabinet. We have what is called an executive council. And that executive council has not been meeting very regularly. That is really where political decisions are supposed to be made. From my standpoint, it is there that policy and vision should be worked out, and that should inform the shadow cabinet. But from where I sit, it seems as though it's a shadow cabinet.
It's top down.
Right, the kind of top-down thing. And that's something that we have to address inside of the APNU. But Chris, even as I make that criticism, I am saying that I don't think that we have worked out yet a vision, a structure. How is it that we're going to run this partnership? We are late. We should have been doing it. But I don't want to attribute maliciousness to people. What I'm saying is really a lack of appreciation.
Immaturity, inexperience.
Well, it may be inexperience.
Dr. Hinds, it must be some reason.
Yes, but I'm saying the reason is, I continue to believe, Chris, that what we had coming out of November 2011 was a mini revolution in this country. All right? And I am aghast that political people did not grasp how enormous that was. And I think that if you do not think that something is fundamental, you don't approach it in a fundamental way. If you think that something was just a routine thing, then you take a routine approach. And I think what is happening here is that we have taken a routine approach to a fundamental development in this country.
Is it that? Now, you talk about the shadow cabinet. How many people the WPA has in that?
One.
Just one. Is it then that the WPA, even it's your own co-leader, Dr. Rupert Ryan, who himself is coming in for some criticisms in terms of leadership and vision, etc. Is it that the WPA is at fault for not having set out its own agenda to the partnership? So they knew what this is our agenda, this is what we would do. Whether we won the presidency, we won the parliament, or the National Assembly, or we were a minority even in the National Assembly.
Yes, the WPA has to take some criticism for that. But also one has to...
some or...
But some. And I'll explain why I say some. Sure. Because one has to appreciate that working in a partnership is not an easy thing, right? First thing, you're working with a big party, you're a small party, right? Second thing, you're working...
So are you handicapped?
Huh?
Are you handicapped?
Well, yeah, I mean, but the handicap is not the whole problem. The second thing is that you are dealing with people, like I said, who were your enemies a few years ago. And you're now learning how to develop a kind of working chemistry. So there are those big challenges in terms. Now, the WPA's position has been from the beginning that we are not going to impose our will on the APNU. If you impose your will, then you don't have a partnership. And I think that approach...
And you might not have been allowed to anyway.
Well, I don't know whether you're allowed to if you know, well, that's your view. But we are never going to...
Mr. Granger said when after he was elected as leader of the APNU, he talked about show me the numbers.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, the numbers are there with 140-something thousand that voted for the APNU, or 100,000, and we participated in making that possible. I will deal with that at some point because I continue to be uncomfortable with this notion that WPA brought nothing to the electoral process and brought nothing to the APNU.
What did you bring? What did you bring? What did you bring?
Whatever the APNU achieved as the APNU, the WPA, the PNC, and all the other forces that participated made that possible. When we start to take out who bring 40, who bring 50, let's look at it's something new. The APNU is something new. And if it's something new, all those who participated brought something to it. And I'm not getting into the cutting and dicing and all that because I think it's foolishness. I just see sometimes the media and other forces get into that kind of nonsense. We were all out there. Let me give you one example and I'll move on very quickly. Right? There were two standard bearers to the APNU. One was the person who embodied what the APNU is about. The people took David Granger and they made David Granger the standard bearer, the person who embodied and personified the quest for freedom at this particular juncture. And then there was Dr. Rupert Roopnaraine, who was the messenger of the APNU, the person who articulated the message on that platform and complimented Mr. Granger. I am arguing here that both Granger and Roopnaraine were equal in terms of how the top of the ticket worked. Roopnaraine is from the WPA, Granger is from the PNC. I say no more. But getting back to what we're talking about in terms of the WPA, we took the position that we are not going to impose our views on the APNU. We are not going to be overly pushy, that we were going to take the position that reconciliation means that sometimes your own positions have to be suppressed in order to make the thing work. My own view is that after 2 years of that, it is time to review that strategy and ask yourself, did that strategy work? Did that strategy help to bring some kind of clearer vision on the part of the APNU? And I don't think it has, if you ask me. Now, there are benefits to that strategy in the sense that the APNU has survived. And we have not had any public quarrel between the two parties, which, if you look at what's happening in Trinidad, with the People's Partnership there, could not
even in government.
Even in government. And so I think the fact that we have decided that in a partnership is not about throwing your weight around, but in sometimes suppressing your own position to make the thing work. We have done that. We are very glad we did that. Yes, the results were not as sterling as we would have wanted them to be, but we thought that in the first 2 years, that was the correct approach.
Is sterling the right word to use to describe in these circumstances?
Well, it may be an overstatement, but
David, I want to move on.
Yeah.
You were very active in the aftermath of what happened at Linden, July.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yesterday, we saw the victims, the persons who were going to the office of the president. What was your feeling at that moment? These persons going there to take the sums of money that were described as pittances from the office of the president.
A sense of disappointment, Chris.
Abandonment that the people might
long abandoned.
Long
Abandoned.
Who do you blame for that, David?
I don't want to get into the blaming.
No, but seriously,
but at the end of the day,
you are a serious voice,
right? Christopher, I think the people of Linden did something that warmed my heart because, again, I'm a Rodneyite. And part of the Rodneyite praxis is the self-organization of working people to stand up in their own defense and for their own dignity. And the people of Linden did that. The political parties were not there to organize them. They organized themselves. They brought their struggle to a level. They confront a government that is formidable on their own. Now, that was a strength. Now, what happened? Given our political culture, the fact that the so-called political parties were not the driving force behind the mobilization, they did not engage the process at a particular time. What I'm saying here is that if the people of Linden brought the struggle to a certain level, at that level, though the people who they voted for needed to be there to give them the necessary solidarity, to give them the necessary leadership. And when the people in Linden looked around, their political representatives were not there. And my suspicion...
And again, we're talking APNU.
Yes, APNU. And my suspicion was that the APNU did not know how to deal with self-organization. And so therefore, because the political culture is that we organize them, we tell them what to do. And if they organize themselves and they bring the struggle, they're on their own.
Well, I was asking you about what seemed to have been almost anticlimactic sequel that they lined up and went to the office of the president to collect their money.
Yes, and I think that was a
In political terms, how do you?
well, it's a culmination of abandonment. I think, I mean, in the first place, I'm saying if your people who voted for you overwhelmingly are on the streets fighting a just cause, your job is to defend them. Your job is not to be reading their eulogy to when they're shot and killed, and then you go reading their eulogy. And I think by the time we got to that point, where the people were shot down and killed by the government, I think the opposition, the APNU in particular, were exposed. Here are your supporters in your heartland standing up for their right. And at no point you were in a position to say, my people are on the streets, my people are fighting a just cause, my people have a right to be on the street, and you will not touch them. In politics, sometimes you have to meet that point. And I'm saying the opposition has the capacity to do that. Say to the government, we're not dealing with you. We're not giving you what you want. We're not talking with you. We're not going to allow you to do so and so and so and so and so unless you guarantee that our people will be left alone to carry out their democratic rights. And it is that leverage, that power that the opposition has that it is not used in defense of its own people. And I continue to believe that that is a serious error on the part of the APNU in particular and the wider opposition in general.
On a number of occasions on this program, you talk about Rodneyite. I had two of your colleagues, I don't know if you had the opportunity to see the program Plain Talk featuring Desmond Trotman MP and Takumo Gonse, executive member. They were ambivalent about whether there is in fact such a concept.
I didn't see the entire program, and I don't want to critique a program that I didn't see in its entirety, but I would be surprised if my colleagues are ambivalent about whether in fact we are Rodneyite or what the case may be.
I think you saw a critique of it by another senior executive member.
Right. No, Chris, no. Let's be fair to the political actors. There's a kind of latitude that I have. I don't sit in parliament. I don't sit in the leadership of the APNU. I consider my role in this society at this particular juncture is to stand up and to lend my voice in support of those whose voices are suppressed. And I am clear about that in terms of my own personal role, but also in the role that I think the WPA needs to play in this society. But we are in a tenuous situation in that we are now part, as WPA, we're part of the system. We have parliamentarians. We have a responsibility to the institutions of the country. We have a responsibility to the governance structures of the country. But I think we also have a historical responsibility to the masses of this country to stand in their defense and to stand in their ranks. And I think we in the WP have to work out how we're going to do that. And when you take some of our leaders...
You're saying we have to work out. You're suggesting that your party has not done it.
Well, no, it's new. We're in the process. We're evolving, and we're not moving as fast.
2 years into this historic, unique opportunity.
You're right. I mean, I'm not dodging away from that, but I'm saying Guyanese people can take heart from the fact that we are hearing what you're saying. We in the WPA, I can't speak for the rest of the APNU. We in the WPA are hearing what people are saying, and we are having discussions, and we are going to formulate an approach from now on that takes into consideration in an active and serious way what the masses of people are saying.
Well, one of the things they will be saying, and they have been saying, is the WPA as a party never got into this discussion as to Rodney and the Tambo Award to former the late President Burnham. Do you regard that to have been a tactical error?
No, I don't think it's a tactical error. I think that we in the WPA have declared for national reconciliation, right? And insofar, once you declare for national reconciliation, then your attitude has to change in terms of how you engage your partners, or you engage the PPP, or you engage the PNC, or you engage the other forces. And the tenor of the conversation around that award was one that we in the WPA felt that we should not be part of. That whole thing of who to blame and who making accusations without providing evidence, we did not think that that was the kind of discourse that was needed around this issue.
Was silence the kind of discourse that was needed?
No, we were not going to be part of that discourse.
No, but I'm asking you what.
No, if you're asking if there is another discourse that we are prepared to be part of, yes. But bear in mind, Chris, there is going to be a commission of inquiry.
Yes.
And the WPA will have to give evidence in that commission of inquiry. We are not about to engage in wild discussion at this point. And so it is within the context of one, the inquiry. Second, that we didn't think that we should be part of a shouting match, that we have reserved comment on that issue. It is not that we don't have a view. We've just reserved comment, one, because of the sensitive nature of it, given the commission that is coming up, and secondly, because of the kind of shouting match, the way in which that thing was going on. We did not want to be part of it.
How has the coming into, as you said, you're part of the governance of this country now, your parliament is one of the arms of government. What effect has that had on the Working People's Alliance as a political party?
It has had some effect. I mean, in the sense that we historically are a party of, if you will, a party of resistance, a party of protest, a party of pressuring. We are in effect a pressure group type of party. We've come out of that. And it's always when you make the transition from that to governance.
And that was a conscious decision?
Yes, it was a conscious decision, but it was a decision that was made within the context of the change in politics. Now, a lot of times people say, well, the WPA used to be this, and it's no longer. Well, the world used to be that, and it's no longer. Guyana used to be that, and it's no longer.
But issues of discrimination, marginalization, have not changed.
But the context in which those things are to be engaged and discussed are changed. And we have to take into consideration context. We have to take into consideration the PNC is long gone from power. That's big. And it's our ally in those days who are now wielding power. That cannot be discounted from the way in which we approach politics. Under the PNC, it was Indian Guyanese who were the first.
But Dr. Hinds, yes. Discrimination is discrimination.
Yes.
Whether it comes from the PNC that is long gone, or the PPP that had one criticized those very things.
Right.
Why should your response to discrimination and marginalization change?
No, it has not changed. Show me where the WPA's position to discrimination and marginalization has changed. I have not changed. But I don't see any of my comrades have changed.
No, but
I don't see the party has said we're no longer against, we're no longer for those who are taking advantage of and standing up for them. I don't see that.
So you're saying that the WPA, as this party, this pressure to bring pressure and resistance.
Yes.
You're saying that has not changed.
That has not changed.
How? Well, give me a couple examples. Of how you have not changed, how you've dealt with marginalization, discrimination, corruption, and these things.
Well,
as a party.
Chris, you would want me to go back and look at all the press statements that we have put out. I mean, our politics are.
I'm asking you just a couple.
No. I'm giving you. These are not the days when we used to be in the streets. I mean, we don't have that capacity anymore. So if people are looking for us to be in the streets and mobilizing people to go on the streets in order to demonstrate where we stand, that's what has changed. What has not changed is the way in which we have continued to hold this administration the feet to the fire in terms of our exposure. Professor Clark Thomas, and sometimes we think that when Thomas writes, he writes as Professor Thomas, but he's a WPA executive member. He's a WPA leader. When he speaks, he speaks with the full support of our party. I myself have continued day in, day out. Brother Yusi, Takumo Gonse, we continue to use what we have. And what we have in the WPA at this point is our voices,
but let's get this clear, David.
Right.
Yes, AUC Kwana writes very prolific
right,
person. You yourself, occasionally Nigel Westmus.
right.
But you don't write as WPA. You write in your individual
We
capacities.
write
Is
it.
there a distinction?
No, there's not a distinction. The WPS constitution allows its members to speak on issues in their own capacity.
Well, that's the point I'm
Right.
making. I'm drawing the distinction between their own capacities
Yes.
and that of the WPA.
But we are WPA members. We don't shy away from that. But the WPA itself has spoken. You, Chris, go back all the press releases that we have issued. We have a program, a groundings program every Sunday for the last 8 years. Every Sunday we are out there critiquing like everybody else. So I don't understand where this thing is that we have been said. What maybe you're hinting at is that in the days of Burnham, we were the ones. Well, that was a different time. We don't have that capacity now.
Okay.
Right? But our militancy continues. And Chris, I go back. The very formation of the APNU, which I'm arguing is the most significant development in Guyanese politics since 1992. We have been integral to that. I think eventually history must recognize the PNC and the WPA for bringing into being something called the APNU, because I think it's a beginning of the process of where we need to go in terms of a solution to this country. The APNU represents a halfway stage in terms of national unity. And we are very proud to have played an active role in that. We played an active role in the joint opposition, the JOOP. Even when we were outside of Parliament, we were very integral to the joint opposition that exposed this government. We were integral to the People's Movement for Justice.
Those were the murders during the crime
Yes,
papers, that's right.
we were integral to the People's Movement for Justice, which helped to expose the Gajraj and eventually removal of Gajraj. And so we have played our role. We continue to play our role. We recognize that there are big big fishes out there, but we also recognize our own history in terms of the days when we were able to really move this country because we had the capacity to do it, and the politics was hospitable for us. That sometimes when people compare us now to then, it looks as though we have been inactive, but we have not been.
Now, how would you describe the strategy of this government to what I think you yourself use the word, the new dispensation?
The strategy of the government is really to make it not a new dispensation and to strangle it as much as possible. And I think the success or failure of the government strategy was always going to be determined by the counter strategy on the part of the opposition. And I think any objective observer will have to conclude that the government has gotten the better of the opposition in terms of real politics, in terms of how you deal with it. The approach by the government, and I think Takungo Gonse has it right, the approach by the government is that, look, we have power, right? At the end of the day, the power to make crucial decisions are in our hands. And if you want to determine how that power is being used, or if you want to share that power, you've got to come and get it. And you have to pay a high price for it. And our opposition politicians, I don't think, are ready to pay that high price or even want to pay that high price. The point I'm making here is that as a dictatorship from the 80s and the 70s, and as we come into this era where the dictatorship now has the cover of democracy, it is even more dangerous and formidable. And so therefore the price for the removal of dictatorship has gotten very high. And when you add to that the engagement of the drug people and the criminals with the government and so forth, the price is extremely high. And I think the question for the opposition is whether in fact they are ready to pay that high price that is needed to really bring this government on the manners and to really change the governance structure.
Well, tell us how, in your view, and as you said, when you all speak, you speak on behalf of the WPA. How do you and the WPA plan to define that price and to take the action necessary?
Well, that price is going to be determined by the government because they're the ones who have the power. And ultimately,
No,
those
but
who,
you said whether you all are
well,
prepared to pay the price.
whether we are prepared to pay that price. That
Yes.
they, no, no. One has to always, in political action, work out that grand strategy, that vision, that long-term thing. And if your long-term strategy is that what you want is a political solution in this country that says for too long, for 60 years, we have engaged in this politics of contention, this politics of acrimony, this politics of bad-mindedness and spite, and that we ought to put an end to that politics and look for a political solution. Then if that's your grand approach, which is what we understand the APNU approach to be, then you are going to fashion your day-to-day approach in order to achieve that. We continue to believe in the WPA that resistance and public resistance and pressure should never be abandoned. And we are alarmed that over the last 20 years, but particularly since November 2011, that legitimate mass protest has been suppressed. And
By
in
whom?
some ways
By whom?
have been criminalized. Well, the government naturally, but the fact that the opposition itself, the AFC and the APNU, have sent signals that they themselves do not believe that public demonstration is desirable at this point. And we believe that when you have a situation like this, where there are forces out in the society who are calling for violence, and our position in WPA is that violence is not going to solve the problem of this country. And so therefore, short of violence, we believe that you have to have a militant strategy that gets the government to recognize that it does not have the monopoly.
You're
on
speaking
power.
here of legitimate peaceful protest.
Legitimate, peaceful, militant struggle, right? We are saying that at a minimum, you have university workers carrying out their struggle in isolation. We have the people in Linden being humiliated 1 year after their people have been murdered. You have the workers of this country who are still catching hell, who cannot make a living in this country, who cannot work for a living wage. We have not brought any relief to them since the election. We are saying there's a way in which you tie all of those struggles up, and you demonstrate to them that you are serious by putting your supporters in the street as a show of force, as a bargaining tool. That you're not telling people to go there and break up the city. What you are saying is that, okay, we have engaged you. We have gone into the office of the president to meet with you. We have tried to be reasonable. We have thrown out the lifeline and said, let's have a government of national unity. You have rejected all of that. What is our next move? Our next move is to then force you, short of violence, to go there. And there's a lot that we can do short of violence.
Do you see a reluctance or a rejection of that as an option by the leadership of the APNU?
Sometimes one is not too sure. And the AFC, I'm not leaving the AFC. After the election, Mr. Ramjatan and the AFC were the first people to call for the YCT to get off the streets.
Yes.
We must not forget that. They were the first party that called for people to get off the street, which I consider to be a historical mistake. Right? And so the AFC and the APNU...
But they couldn't have taken the APNU supporters.
No, I'm just speaking for historical accuracy.
Yes, sure.
Right? That both parties seem to have taken that line. Sometimes I don't know whether it's reluctance or rejection. Sometimes it looks like reluctance, sometimes it looks like rejection. But the bottom line is...
You have a great analytical mind, a great political savvy. I mean... Don't be ambivalent here, David.
If I don't know about great analytical mind, but when analytical minds can't decide on something, it's bad enough. Really, it's bad enough. There's no way. I mean, people laugh us. I travel the Caribbean all the time. And my colleagues and other people say, why you all in Guyana? Always are saddled. You all were saddled with the dictatorship under the PNC. Now you all are saddled with the dictatorship under the people. What is it about Guyana that allows itself to become so consumed by these dictatorships and to appear so helpless.
Um, you saw recently in the Brazilians have risen up. Even during a football game, they said, no, 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 we're protesting. I don't know if you were aware that the Brazilians in Guyana protested.
Yes, so I
What was,
heard.
what was your reaction to
My
that?
reaction to that was to hang my head in shame. Because, Chris, we come from a tradition of resistance. Go back. Our foreparents, those enslaved people, began resistance since on the shores of Africa. I mean, they resisted, they survived, and they resisted. No,
And some of them prefer death. They jumped
yes,
in the.
Indian brethren came here as indentured and Chinese and Portuguese, and they fought down that system. We come from a tradition of resistance, and it is really a shame that we have been forced to give up mass resistance in this country. So long as I have a voice, Chris, so long as I have a voice, and so long as I'm given the opportunity to speak, I will continue to say to the opposition, you are shortchanging your supporters when you do not bring them out into the open space and let them proclaim what is it they want. And this is not just to the APNU, the AFC. I continue to believe that the AFC nursing, what I call nursing of the Indian vote that it got, it's a mistake. That what the AFC ought to be doing at this juncture is to go into the Indian areas and to tell Indian people that, look, you voted for us. We are glad that you voted for us, but we are a junction in this country that what we need is not just a vote. What we need is a change of governance in this country. And that it is not going to be accomplished until you, Indian brothers and sisters, join with your African brothers and sisters in a larger struggle. But the AFC is not doing that. The APNU is not going into the African Guyanese community and say to the Africans, you've given us your votes. We have tried to bring about change by engagement. It is not working. And we now need to move to another level where we want you to actively engage in struggle on a day-to-day basis.
David, Dr. Hinds, I heard your colleagues speak, oh, well, we're trying to do things in the National Assembly. Now, this government has embarked on some economic programs that could strangle this country. If they come off, they might be good. But are we into gambling, or are we into sensible management of a country? Take this Chinese, the contract for the Chinese airport. A toilet set. In the price for that toilet set is $24,000. Everything is inflated by many, many factors. So it is not, when we talk, and when some of us speak, we're not just talking politics, we're not talking opposing anyone or government or opposition. We are saying ordinary people, the debt of this country, what we owe, what we might have to pay back, because listen, we are buying a massive amount. We have to buy, under the Amila project, for example, we have to buy all the power they could produce, whether we can sell it or not. We have to be maintaining existing facility. So we may, in fact, have more than double what the country really needs. There are bread and butter issues. I mean, you tell people about this toilet set that the Chinese are selling us. Everyone, it's $424,000, $424,000 Ghana dollars per set. These things are scandalous. So why can't we, on specific issues, on Gaisuko, this is a failing industry. And you're going to bring a party activist and pay him a ton of money? Why aren't we? What's wrong, David? What's wrong with us?
Power concedes nothing without struggle. That's what Frederick Douglass thought. That Walter Rodney refined it here and said, nobody gives you freedom. You have to fight for your freedom, and when you get it, you cherish it. Because if somebody gives you freedom, they can take it back
Well, no,
tomorrow.
no, but I'm taking it outside of the broad
But
thing.
it
I
can't
talk,
go outside. But I'm bringing it back inside because I think that a government gets away with what latitude it gets to get away with it. In a normal country where there are checks and balances, where where the democratic system works, where you have an opposition that is vigilant and an opposition that is empowered, that will not happen. The chances of it happening are very slim. It is able to happen in this country because what we have here is executive tyranny.
no, but we also have, you have a majority in the National
But
Assembly. I
that's,
don't care, it's
but
only
as
one.
no, but as I said, Chris, there's a limit to what you can do with that majority. You can check what you can check. The budget comes to you, you can cut it, you can trim it, and so on. Once you move beyond that, you do not have very much power to do anything else.
Within the National Assembly, you don't have much power. But there must be other things you could. You must be bringing these things. Look, nobody. These are contracts, David, that the opposition has in their hands.
Yes, I understand what you're
No,
saying.
now, and you talk politics.
Yes.
Someone said to me, not only that a country gets the government it deserves, but an opposition gets the
No, I
government it deserves.
agree with that. I agree
Does
with
the
that.
APNU deserve this government?
But none of them, APNU, AFC, PPP, by themselves, that is my argument. I will not entrust this government to any of those parties on their own. At the end of the day, for me, Chris, the way you get out of this is that we have to have a political solution. We have to have bodies on the streets. Those things that you are talking about are not going to be corrected in Parliament. Parliament is limited. No, Parliament is important, but it is limited in what it can do. That you have to put pressure on where the power lies, and it lies in the executive branch. And the executive is not going to give up that power if you don't push for it.
Now, again, as a political brain and commentator, it's not happening in Parliament.
Yes.
All these things are being forced
Right.
through practical,
Right.
but some checks is also are being
Yes,
done.
right.
How do the people, and what can the people do about the situation?
Those who voted for the APNU need to descend on Congress Place and Atfield Street and to tell their leaders that we want you to do something concrete in this country.
Why shouldn't they descend on the WPA office?
Well, they can come there, they'll be right, but that's not where the power lies. The power lies with the APNU there at that field, but they can come there too. The point I'm making here is to go to your leadership and tell them, we're not going to take this anymore. I am prepared to be part of a march on the APNU and the AFC. I think we have to reach that point where the people who voted for these parties should march on them. I agree that we should march on the government, but I think we should first of all march on our own leaders and let them understand that the approach that they're taking is not in our interest.
This airport, and it shocks me. We're building an airport with 8 ramps, and lots of airports in the Caribbean don't have those things.
Yeah.
We have the airport is sleepy most of the day.
Yeah, right.
We are spending what? Close to, in terms of actual costs, in terms of taxes foregone, we're spending $250 million
Well, it's a way of putting
on an airport that is not making.
It's a way of putting money in the pockets of the cronies of the government. It's a way of enriching a minority mafia in this country. It's a way of saying to your supporters, look, we're building big things. We're building an airport. We're building Amelia Falls thing and so forth. So the government has a clear interest and strategy in what it is doing. And I'm saying it is not about reforming that. It's about changing the basis of that.
Now,
it will have to go to the basis of that.
Can we expect, whilst you're here, are you pushing your WPA in that direction? And if you're not, are you saying, I, David Hinds, am now deciding on certain initiatives, maybe you will have better success than you had with when you were threatened to dig up the road. What kind of initiatives are you looking for? And we've got a minute and three quarter. 60 seconds, I'm told.
Well, because I'm a party person, I'm a team person. I don't see myself as some maximum leader or anything. I belong
But
to
if the system is not working, shouldn't
I
you?
belong to the WPA and I will work within the WPA to push for these things, to push for changes. I will work in other organizations. I'm working in other, what is loosely called civil society organizations and so forth, at the community level. I will continue to do the kind of work that I'm doing in order to ensure that this situation comes to an end. I am not contemplating going back to another election under these rules. It's disaster, and my position is very clear. As we stand now, though the Constitution does not compel a government of national unity, it does not it does not prevent us from trying to bring about a government of national unity under this framework. Push the government, let them say no, let them say no. And the more that they say no, the more you have a case in which to press for a broader strategy.
Dr. David Hinds, thank you very much for appearing on Plain Talk this evening. Operators and viewers, thank you. Good night. See you next week.